Welcome the anointed ones. Beware the quiet ones. They don't bark, but their silence will dismantle you. There's a chilling irony in this. The psychopath, the master of terror, meticulously plotting their mind games, steps into the arena certain of their dominance, only to retreat trembling, undone by a force they didn't see coming. You. Here's an unsettling fact. Studies show that psychopaths are drawn to chaos because they believe they can control it. But what happens when they encounter someone who isn't playing by the rules, someone whose calm confidence can't be shaken? The predator suddenly becomes prey. Imagine their confusion. They came armed with manipulation, intimidation, and fear, only to find you standing there, unmoved, unbothered, and maybe even stifling a yawn. Because let's be honest, when you radiate a kind of energy that terrifies the terrifier, the whole dynamic flips. You don't just survive, you send them packing with their tail between their legs. At number 1, your aura as a weapon. They underestimated the power of your aura, that invisible force surrounding you, shaping how the world reacts to your presence. It wasn't loud or aggressive, it didn't need to be. It was a quiet storm, a controlled intensity that filled the room without effort. They thought they could break you with their games, but the moment they stepped into your space, something shifted. Your energy didn't just hold power, it demanded respect. It wasn't about words or actions, it was about what couldn't be seen but was impossible to ignore. That aura of yours, charged with unshakable confidence and an unspoken sense of authority, wasn't something they could manipulate. They felt it, even if they didn't understand it. It was primal, an ancient recognition of strength beyond the physical. For someone like them, used to dominating through fear and control, it was a shock to the system. They thrived on vulnerability, but your presence offered none. Instead, it exuded a warning. This is not the prey you were looking for. Their instincts betrayed them. Their arrogance wavered. What was supposed to be a game of power became a desperate scramble to hold on to their own. Your aura became a mirror, reflecting their own weakness back at them. Every step they took toward you felt heavier. Every word they tried to weaponize lost its edge. They didn't just see you, they felt you. And that feeling was enough to make their confidence crumble. It wasn't loud, dramatic, or theatrical. It was the quiet kind of power that doesn't need to be announced. They came to terrify, but they left terrified. Number 2, you became their mirror. The psychopath came ready to play their usual game: domination, manipulation, control. They thought they had the upper hand because they knew how to exploit people's insecurities and fears. But what they didn't expect was how you turned the entire game on its head without even trying. You didn't fight back with the same tools they used. Instead, you became a mirror, forcing them to confront something they were completely unprepared for, themselves. Your presence didn't just challenge them, it exposed them. Every tactic they used reflected back on them, showing their desperation and their flaws in stark detail. The more they tried to rattle you, the more they revealed their own instability. They weren't prepared for someone who wouldn't flinch, who wouldn't give them the reactions they craved. Instead of pulling you into their chaos, they found themselves drowning in it. Psychopaths thrive on being the puppet masters, but in front of you their strings unraveled. You didn't attack, you simply existed in a way that made them painfully aware of their own weaknesses. They came to dominate, but what they found was the one thing they couldn't control: a person who refused to be afraid of them. This wasn't a battle of wits or physical strength, it was something deeper, something they couldn't quite name but couldn't escape. You became the embodiment of everything they feared: calm, unshaken, and utterly unbothered by their attempts to terrorize. And that terrified them more than anything else. They didn't run because you were dangerous in the way they expected. They ran because you made them see the truth about themselves, and for someone like them, that's the most unbearable terror of all. Number 3, the power of unreadability. Psychopaths pride themselves on being able to read people like open books. They study expressions, reactions, and weaknesses, piecing together exactly how to manipulate their target. But with you, they hit a wall. You were an enigma, someone they couldn't figure out. and that alone threw them completely off balance. Your unpredictability was your greatest strength. They poked and prodded, expecting cracks to appear, but none did. You didn't give them the emotional cues they were looking for. No fear in your eyes, no anger in your tone, no hesitation in your presence. It wasn't that you were hiding anything, it was that you didn't need to reveal anything at all. And that unsettled them. For someone who thrives on control, not knowing what's coming next is pure torture. They relied on their ability to anticipate every move, but you were a wild card. You didn't react the way most people did. You didn't play the role they had written for you in their mind. Instead, you were a blank page, impossible to predict and even harder to manipulate. Every attempt they made to corner you seemed to backfire. They couldn't tell if you were one step ahead of them or simply untouchable. It wasn't just confusing, it was infuriating. And in their frustration, they began to unravel. The confidence they walked in with turned into doubt, and doubt turned into fear. They realized too late that the power they thought they had over you was an illusion. They couldn't read you because you weren't playing their game. In your presence, their carefully constructed facade cracked. And for the first time, they felt what they always inflicted on others: helplessness. It wasn't anything you said or did, it was simply who you are. Number 4. Unflinching calm. Psychopaths are masters of chaos. They thrive on triggering emotional outbursts, feeding on the energy of fear, anger, and confusion they create in others. But when they encountered you, it was like hitting a wall of stone-cold calm. A calm so profound it stopped them in their tracks. You didn't react the way they expected. No raised voice, no panicked expression, no frantic attempts to defend yourself. Your stillness was unnerving because it robbed them of what they needed most: your emotional energy. They tried to rattle you, to drag you into their storm, but your unflinching calm made their efforts feel futile. It wasn't just the lack of reaction that got to them. It was the message your calmness sent. It said, "You don't scare me, you can't control me, I see right through you." For someone who thrives on being the puppet master, that kind of defiance wasn't just frustrating, it was terrifying. The more they pushed, the more they felt the void of your unshaken presence. Chaos is their comfort zone, but your calmness was foreign territory, a place where their usual tricks didn't work. It wasn't just silence, it was dominance without aggression, power without force. They weren't ready for someone who could hold their ground without lifting a finger. They came expecting chaos and found themselves staring into the abyss of your composure. In that moment, they realized they had nothing to work with, no cracks to exploit, no buttons to press. Your calmness didn't just drain them of their power, it reflected their own insignificance. And for someone who feeds on control, that realization was more terrifying than anything they'd ever inflicted on others. Number 5. Fear turned inside out. Fear is a weapon psychopaths wield with precision. They use it to destabilize, manipulate, and dominate. They expect their targets to crumble under its weight. But when they came for you, the dynamic shifted. The fear they tried to project onto you didn't stick. Instead, it boomeranged back with devastating force, landing squarely on them. You didn't flinch or give them the reaction they craved. Your refusal to engage on their terms wasn't just defiance, it was a revelation. It revealed that their power was an illusion, built entirely on how others responded to their threats. Without that reaction, they had nothing. Their game unraveled before their eyes. As they tried harder to assert control, they found themselves slipping. The harder they pushed, the more they felt the grip of fear tighten, not around you, but around themselves. It wasn't anything you did physically. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence that radiated from you. It made them question everything they thought they knew about power. They came expecting an easy victory, a performance where they played the predator and you the prey. Instead, they found themselves in a psychological checkmate, every move leading to their own unraveling. The tables turned without warning, and suddenly they were the ones looking for an escape. Your presence wasn't just resistant, it was transformative. It turned their weapon of fear against them, leaving them exposed and powerless. For the first time, they felt what they had so often inflicted on others, the crushing weight of uncertainty and self-doubt. And in that moment, the fear they tried to instill became theirs to carry. They came to terrorize, but they left questioning their own sanity. Number 6, the unyielding boundary. Boundaries are the ultimate test of power, and yours were unyielding. They weren't loud or overt, but they were there, firm, undeniable, and impossible to cross. You didn't need to scream or fight to defend yourself. The sheer strength of your self-respect built a fortress they couldn't breach. Psychopaths thrive on finding cracks in people's defenses. They manipulate, test limits, and exploit vulnerabilities, confident that they'll always find a way in. But with you, every attempt was met with an impenetrable wall. They didn't see fear or hesitation. What they saw was someone who valued themselves too much to allow even a sliver of their poison to seep through. Your boundaries weren't just about keeping them out. They were a declaration of who you are. They spoke of a person who knew their worth and refused to compromise it for anyone, no matter how cunning or dangerous. Every time they tried to push, they were met with the unspoken message, "You have no power here." They underestimated the strength it takes to maintain such boundaries, to hold your ground without faltering. But as they hurled themselves against your fortress, they began to see the futility of their efforts. It wasn't just frustrating, it was humiliating. They weren't used to being denied access, to having their control stripped away so effortlessly. By the time they realized there was no way in, it was too late. They had spent all their energy trying to break something unbreakable. And in the end, it wasn't just your boundaries they encountered. It was a truth they couldn't escape. You were untouchable. Number 7, the superpower of awareness. Psychopaths rely on stealth. Their power lies in slipping under the radar, manipulating without detection. But with you, they ran into something they hadn't anticipated: your unrelenting awareness. From the moment they stepped into your orbit, you saw them for what they were. Not who they pretended to be, but what lay beneath, their tricks, their intentions, their insecurities. You didn't need dramatic confrontations or heated arguments. Your awareness alone was enough to dismantle their entire strategy. Every word they spoke, every move they made was met with the silent knowledge that you already knew their game. They were playing a hand you had already seen before, and it showed. What makes awareness a superpower isn't just the ability to see what others miss. It's knowing how to use that vision to stay 2 steps ahead. You didn't fall for their charm or their manipulations because you recognized the patterns before they could take root. Their tricks weren't impressive to you. They were predictable, even pathetic. This wasn't a battle of strength or endurance. It was a silent war of perception, and you had already won. By understanding their vulnerabilities, the very things they hid from the world, you flipped the script. They weren't the hunter anymore. They were the exposed, vulnerable prey. Their usual advantage, the ability to exploit without being noticed, evaporated. In your presence, they felt seen, not in the flattering, charming way they sought, but in a way that stripped them bare. They couldn't manipulate you because you had already stripped away their mask, leaving them vulnerable and powerless. In the end, your awareness wasn't just your defense, it was their undoing. The clarity of your perception became the mirror they couldn't escape, reflecting back every weakness they tried to hide. Number 8, you rewrote the script. Psychopaths craft a script for every encounter, a twisted story where they're the puppeteer, pulling strings and orchestrating fear. They came prepared to cast you as the victim, the submissive player who would bend under their control. But you didn't follow their script. In fact, you tore it up and rewrote the entire narrative before they even realized it. They expected the usual responses: panic, anger, or compliance. Instead, they were met with something they couldn't compute: your refusal to engage. You didn't react how they wanted, and in doing so, you took away the fuel that powered their manipulation. Without fear to exploit or submission to savor, their carefully laid plans started to crumble. This wasn't just defiance, it was a complete shift in the dynamic. By rewriting the rules, you forced them into a position they never expected to be in, one where they were no longer in control. You didn't fight back on their terms because you understood that the moment you did, you'd be playing their game. Instead, you flipped the game board entirely. Your refusal to play turned their power into frustration. Every tactic they used fell flat because the story they had written simply didn't apply to you. They weren't prepared for someone who wouldn't follow the script, who operated on their own terms with unshakable confidence. In the end, their power wasn't stolen. It was dissolved, dismantled by your quiet rebellion. They left not just defeated but confused, scrambling to understand how they lost control. You didn't just survive their attempts to manipulate. You redefined the narrative itself, proving that the real power lies in refusing to play their game at all. Number 9. Your energy was too pure. Psychopaths thrive in darkness, feeding on fear, control, and manipulation. They operate best in environments where chaos and negativity reign. But when they came up against you, they encountered something they couldn't process. An energy so pure and strong that it drowned out the shadows they relied on. Your presence wasn't just different. It was disruptive. It wasn't about being loud or confrontational. It was the quiet intensity of your light, a kind of inner clarity and peace that their darkness simply couldn't penetrate. Their usual tactics, the lies, the manipulation, the intimidation, bounced off you like arrows against steel. This wasn't about physical strength or cleverness. It was the purity of your essence, the kind of energy that comes from deep self-awareness and an unshakable sense of who you are. That purity acted as a barrier they couldn't cross. Every attempt they made to dominate or control you was met with something they couldn't explain, a force that overwhelmed their darkness, rendering it powerless. They didn't just fail to affect you, they felt their own energy turning back on them. The negativity they projected seemed to dissolve in your presence, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. For someone who thrives on control, this was a nightmare. They weren't just outmatched, they were unmoored, unable to function in the face of your light. Your energy wasn't just untouchable, it was transformative. It didn't fight their darkness, it neutralized it. They came to dominate, expecting the same predictable response they'd gotten from others. Instead, they found themselves overwhelmed, outmatched, and ultimately undone by a force they didn't understand. It wasn't that you tried to defeat them, it was simply that who you are made their darkness irrelevant. Number 10. They realized you weren't alone. When the psychopath first approached, they saw only one person, you, a target, an opportunity to manipulate and control. What they didn't count on was the invisible force standing behind you, an entire presence of power and protection they couldn't see but certainly could feel. They were not just facing you as an individual, but everything you represented, an unbreakable foundation built from years of self-resilience, spiritual protection, and untold layers of strength passed down through generations. You weren't just a person to be conquered. You were a living embodiment of the invisible forces that stood with you. Whether it was the weight of ancestral wisdom, the energy of those who fought for your existence, or the deep, unshakable faith that anchored you, the psychopath sensed it. They might not have understood it, but they felt it, and it terrified them. Every word they spoke, every move they made was met not just by your resistance, but by an overwhelming sense that they were battling something much larger than themselves. They came to break you, but they faced a strength they couldn't touch. They might have expected you to be isolated, alone, and vulnerable, but instead, they found themselves up against something unshakable, a force field they couldn't breach. They realized they were not just challenging your will, but everything that had shaped it. You were a conduit for something far older and more powerful than they could fathom. That invisible army, whether spiritual, ancestral, or divine, was far more intimidating than anything they had encountered. And so, in the face of that overwhelming power, they retreated. They didn't just walk away from you, they fled from the invisible strength that stood behind you. And in doing so, they unknowingly confirmed the one thing they feared the most. They were utterly outmatched. Number 11. You're a natural disruptor. Psychopaths excel in creating a carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation, weaving stories that play to their strengths and prey on the weaknesses of others. They thrive in environments where everyone plays along with their narrative, where deceit and control are the rules of the game. But when you entered the picture, everything they'd built began to crumble. It wasn't that you actively fought back or exposed them. It was simply that your authenticity shattered their illusion. You didn't follow the script they had written for you, where they expected you to fall into their mold, vulnerable, pliable, easily controlled. You refused. Your refusal to conform to their false narratives was a disruption, an earthquake that made everything they'd worked so hard to manipulate fall apart. They couldn't control you because you didn't allow them the space to. Your presence exposed their lies without a single word. What made this so powerful wasn't just your actions, it was your very nature. You operated from a place of raw authenticity, and in doing so, you made their dishonesty look not only transparent but utterly pathetic. Every time they tried to weave a new layer of manipulation, your realness cut through it like a knife through paper. They didn't know how to respond because they'd never encountered someone who didn't buy into their game. In your presence, they couldn't hide behind masks or false personas. You didn't give them the satisfaction of playing along. And without that facade, they were left exposed, their carefully laid plans nothing more than a house of cards ready to collapse. Your authenticity wasn't just a shield, it was an unstoppable force that left them vulnerable, out of their depth, and ultimately powerless. Number 12. They saw their end in you. To a psychopath, power isn't just a goal, it's a lifeline. Their entire existence hinges on maintaining control, on manipulating others and building a world where they hold the strings. But when they encountered you, they didn't just see a target. They saw a mirror of everything that threatened their carefully constructed empire. You weren't just an obstacle. You were the living, breathing embodiment of their inevitable downfall. Your unshakable strength, the quiet defiance you carried effortlessly, spoke louder than any confrontation could. It was the realization that someone like you couldn't be controlled, couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be bent to their will. That realization was like a silent, ticking clock in their mind. Every moment in your presence was a reminder that their reign was fragile, built on the manipulation of others' weaknesses. And it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. They saw in you what they feared most, their own vulnerability, their own inability to keep everything in place. While they thrived on chaos and the illusion of control, your calm, unwavering resistance exposed the cracks in their armor. Your strength wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was undeniable. And as long as you stood unmoved, it became clear that everything they had built on lies and fear was unsustainable. In you, they saw their future, a crumbling empire, a life full of hollow victories, and an inevitable fall that they couldn't escape. You weren't just a person. They were looking at their own end. And that truth, silent but powerful, was enough to make them retreat, unsure of how much longer they could keep pretending they were in control. Number 13. Your silence spoke volumes. In a world where psychopaths thrive on noise, the manipulation, the threats, the calculated chaos, you came with the most powerful weapon they couldn't understand: silence. While they used words to twist, bend, and control, your quietude became an unspoken force, a presence so powerful it reverberated in the space between them and you. Your silence wasn't passive, it was a statement, a defiance so loud it drowned out every attempt they made to control the narrative. They expected to provoke a reaction, anger, fear, panic, or at least some sign of discomfort. But when faced with your stillness, their efforts unraveled. The more they pushed, the more they saw that you weren't a person they could manipulate with words. And that scared them more than anything. Their words, meant to entangle you, simply bounced off the impermeable force of your silence. It became clear that their usual tactics no longer had any power. In their chaotic, manipulative world, they thrived on keeping people off balance, forcing reactions that kept their victims in a state of vulnerability. But your silence wasn't something they could provoke or control. It was a void that spoke volumes, creating a tension they couldn't release, an energy they couldn't manipulate. Each moment of quiet was a reminder that you weren't participating in their game, that they had no hold over you, and that you were impervious to their manipulation. The more they tried to speak, the more their words lost meaning. Your silence didn't need an explanation. It was louder than anything they could say. And in that silence they were exposed, trapped in the uncomfortable reality that they had no power over someone who didn't need to speak to be heard. In the end, it wasn't the dramatic battles or grand gestures that dismantled the psychopath's power. It was your unwavering presence, your refusal to be manipulated, and the unspoken strength you carried effortlessly. Every tactic they used, every lie they told, and every attempt to control you was met with something far more powerful: your authenticity, your boundaries, your unshakable awareness. You didn't play their game. You rewrote the rules, turning their attempts at terror into nothing more than empty noise. They thought they were the predators, but they were the ones exposed, unraveling in the face of your strength. Your silence, your stillness, and your clarity became weapons far more potent than anything they could conceive. And as they realized the futility of their efforts, they saw something far more terrifying than they could have imagined. They weren't just losing control over you. They were losing control over their entire empire of lies and manipulation. You didn't just survive the encounter. You turned the tables completely, showing them that true power doesn't come from domination or deception. It comes from being unapologetically yourself, from standing firm in your truth, and from knowing that no matter how hard they tried to tear you down, they could never touch what makes you untouchable. And that was the end of their reign. If you found this powerful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more mind-shifting content. Like, share, and leave your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Let's keep the conversation going and keep empowering each other. Thanks for tuning in. Stay blessed.